Well, I wanted to create for you a podcast here that would give you some more insight of how to assess student learning. You know, one of the things you have to create for your unit plan is a pretty detailed test of some sort, a summative assessment. And so this podcast will help you to generate some ideas of how to do that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of the slides because oftentimes there's links and I'd like you to go and explore those particular links. I think that would be really helpful for you to do. So let's run through this. We'll be as quick as possible and then you can spend as much time as you want exploring these a little more in detail. The two things to keep in mind for assessment is that we want to know how well the students are doing in their learning. And for the students, they need to know how well they're doing in their learning as well. Assessment also is a double-edged sword because it's a reflection of our teaching. If we're teaching deliberately, if we're teaching well, if we're teaching targetedly, then students should be learning. Remember, the focus that we want to have as secondary teachers is to make sure that it is about student learning, not covering information. And that is a real drawback with a number of secondary people. Have to cover. No, remember, we're going to uncover learning, and we're going to do it in a very deliberate manner. So when we look at developing social studies skills and the thinking that should be going on in the minds of our students, there's a lot of things that goes beyond what can just be tested in a typical pencil paper test. And so there's a deep level of understanding and learning that we really want our students to attain, and we want them to be able to show us. So on this slide, I've just written out a couple of things from a really useful social studies textbook that I reference a lot for our class. And look at these and think about how deep each of these really happens to be, and then how are you going to test them or create some kind of an assessment so that you're assessing their learning. Going back to 262, you should have been introduced to the whole idea of formative assessment and summative assessment. We're seeing a change in the educational climate where the focus is on formative assessment, because we're forming the learning of the students. That's what's going to tell us what they know, how they know, whether they have misconceptions, misinformation. So we want to spend a lot of time creating opportunities to test students' learning in a non-testing way. So we're assessing it, I should say, instead of testing, and we're going to use this formative assessment. We're not judging them. Oftentimes these formative assessments are never used as grades at all. The final part of the assessment, as we come to the end of our teaching time over an extended length of time with a targeted set of learning or performance skills, we're going to use summative assessment. And now this is the key. Your summative assessment must directly match up to the pre-selected learning objectives. You cannot just write a test question because you want to write it. Each question, each part of the test has to be deliberately designed so that it is measuring learning that you intended for the students, and you design that intended learning at the very beginning by creating learning objectives. And hopefully you've made those learning objectives very clear to the students so that they understand that there is a purpose for doing what they're doing in the classroom. It's leading to a desired set of learning or performance skills. This particular website on the bottom here has 56 different examples of formative assessments. Now, some of them aren't going to pertain to secondary. There's some there's some elementary things in here. A few of the links are broken, but check this out. It's going to give you a variety of things. A number of you use ticket out the door, ticket out the door, ticket out the door. Oh, ticket out the door gets so tiring in student teaching. Can you think about that? 15 weeks. 5 days each week. You're not going to do a ticket out the door. This is going to show you a whole different ways to assess student learning. I really like this FLUBAROO. It's a brand new website for me, but you can use Google Docs, use FLUBAROO, and create online quizzes, and it grades them. It grades them in a spreadsheet for you. It's a beautiful little program. I can't wait to use it. I also want you to take a look at this website, different types of learning activities, and then there's a brilliant video here. A lot of times my methodology students really want to use discussion and debate, but they're not skilled on how to use discussion and debate, and it winds up being somewhat of a flop when they're out in the classrooms doing their teaching, or it's a bad learning curve in student teaching. Watch how this teacher guides and develops this process with her students. It's a short video. It's well worth watching. Now, we've talked about essays before, especially DBQs, how to create them, and you should include some type of an essay DBQ in your unit plan. But please take time to think through this. I mean, essays should not just be thrown together. They take a lot of work to develop them well. And the hardest thing about the essay is you need, before the students write them, to write the essay yourself and identify what is the most important information and what are you going to be satisfied with the students expressing themselves in the essay. Are you going to get bogged down on mechanical, spelling, grammatical errors? Are you going to mark them down for those things? Well, I think you should. That's part of an essay, but it is not going to be the bulk of the grading. So make sure that you're doing your job to put the essays together. There's nothing more frustrating for a student than to wonder what they're supposed to write about. You're going to have to teach them how to do that anyways. Short answers are a very valuable part of any social studies test. This allows you to get into the meat of the student's understanding and having them write only a few short sentences. And so I've given you a couple examples here that you could include, you could model from as you put short answers into your test. But again, you need to know exactly what is the information that you want the students to convey. And just like in an essay, you're going to have to determine what would be a full point answer, what would be a partial point answer. Again, we're looking for understanding and learning. Okay, so please, if the student wrote Declaration of Independence, I do think we know they mean Declaration of Independence. Whether you want to take off 0.25 points on it, a quarter point on that, that's up to you. Just be consistent and be fair. Fill in the blanks are also often used in social studies tests, but I'm telling you, they can be somewhat problematic, because you're looking for certain things. The student might be guessing, what do they mean? So I have 3 examples, and you'll notice the last example is the most clear example, and what it does is it provides clues in it to help the student fill in the blank. Now you got to think, is that really such a great question? No, I think you can do a much better job using a short answer than you can fill in the blank, but there are times when fill in the blank can be helpful. I mean, under the unclear example, I could put John Steinbeck was the author of Grapes of Wrath. Are you going to mark me wrong on that? Because you wanted Thomas Jefferson was the author of the Declaration of Independence. But my answer was just as right. Think about how you create these fill in the blanks. Multiple choice. There's a lot of multiple choice test options for you to look at. Please refer to the test materials that are down in the White Library, basement of the White Library. There are sometimes you can take a multiple choice test right out of a booklet and use it because it's appropriate. There's other times that you have to alter it specific to the teaching and learning that has been going on in your classroom. One of the most important things we can do is to teach the students that there's a basic construction. The stem is going to be that statement, question, or issue, and they need to really read it and understand it. And then there's going to be answer choices. 2 of those answer choices are typically wrong. 2, however, are correct, are more correct, and 1 of those is very correct. One way of grading these multiple choice questions is to give them 1 full point for the correct answer and a half point for the second correct answer if you go that route. Please don't make the correct answer so obvious and all the other ones so weird that they know they're not the answer. Keep your answer choices about the same length, because you know as well as I do, the longest answer choice is often the correct answer choice. Spread your answer choices out among A, B, C, and D. Do not let A and C become the primary answers in the answer choice. And for goodness sakes, don't use all of these or none of these, because that becomes answer D. It's crazy. Do not go beyond 4 answer choices. And with special ed people, let's keep this, our special needs learners, let's keep it to 3. Remember, you do have to create an alternative test for your unit plan that includes a modified test for special needs learners. So you might give your typical students 25 multiple choice questions. We're not going to do that to our special needs learners. We're going to reduce that number considerably. True and false. I'm not even going to go there. What a dumb idea, because it doesn't measure learning. Look at my examples down at the bottom. Here's the way you want to do this. The typical true and false question: the U.S. Congress is a bicameral legislature. True or false? True. How about if we put it into a short answer? The U.S. Congress is defined as a bicameral legislature. Briefly explain the difference between a bicameral legislature and a unicameral legislature. That second example is going to give you a full sense of a student's learning. Matching. Matching can be done for people. It can be done for events. It can be done for maps. Be done for vocabulary. All kinds of ways to do it. And so you typically have a column on the left side and you have answer choices on the right side. You always want to include more answer choices than there are blanks to fill in, but not too many more. 1 or 2 more is all you need to do. Don't make this hard on students. The second thing is, please divide up your matching into segments. So maybe a segment of 8 to 10, followed by another segment of 8 to 10, because all a student needs to do is get a couple wrong in the first part of this, and it snowballs in more get wrong and more get wrong and more get wrong. Okay? These can be confusing to a lot of students. I'm not a real fan of matching myself, but there are times when it is certainly appropriate. So there's some guidelines for writing matching questions. I'm going to let you read those there. And so take your time, think this through. I will be looking at the assessments you create. Now, in social studies, we need to help children to, and we'll call them students. They're children, but you know, when they're secondary, we like to make them think they're actually not a child, even though they act like some younger children than they actually are their own age. Sidebar comment there. We want them to be able to read charts, graphs, maps, all kinds of things like that. We're very weak and have been very weak nationally in the social studies in this one area, year after year after year. All the testing statistics that comes up in on the national test shows that this is a huge weakness. And so what we need to do is incorporate these kinds of things into our teaching and help kids to learn how to read them. So this chart on the right, there's some higher level interpretation skills. There has to be some background knowledge in some of the terminology here, and then the student has to interpret it. And you could either create this in the answers to this in a multiple choice test, or they could write it out in a short answer. If you had multiples of these which they were examining, like you could include them in a DBQ, and then they'd have to write out an essay, an argumentative essay or positional essay. Using historical documents, cartoons, and pictures, all this stuff is really, really great. And this can elicit a lot of feedback from students as they're interpreting what they're seeing or how all of this fits together. So I just grabbed these randomly. You could use them independently, or you could pull them together somehow to make them an accessible item. Political cartoons are fantastic. If you're not using them, you need to. There's a guy named Kagel, C-A-G-E-L, has his own website with lesson plans on political cartoons, and they're remarkable. He doesn't do historical political cartoons as in like Civil War. He is a current artist of political cartoons, and then he keeps links to the other political cartoonists of our days. I mean, I love political cartoons. The wit and the satire through the drawing is just fascinating to me. Reading and completing maps is certainly something we need to do within our social studies classes as well. Our students are basically geographically illiterate. And so many social studies teachers are pretty geographically illiterate. You're going to get very, very good at knowing things about the world as far as geopolitical issues and locations. You will need to become a student of these things. So here's two possible maps. A couple ways to put these together would be through matching, or as you can see, this one Canada map actually has places for you to match up by writing in the names. Now, here's what's not on both of these: answer choices. And you do need to put answer choices on these because students don't know how to spell some of these words. I mean, can you spell Saskatchewan? I can't. Okay. So, how about Nunavut? Anybody good on that one? So if you're going to need to have the answer choices there for them to copy over correctly, I do think it's important that they copy the words correctly, spelling them correctly. So make sure you use those. Now, I'm big on authentic assessments, and I always had at least one big project in my social studies classes a year, and I had students create the most remarkable projects. I won't go into time to explain them. If you want to talk about some ideas, I can share you some things that'll just blow your minds what students did. What's so neat about these is that it extends their learning, it deepens their learning, and it creates lasting learning for them. And so they can create posters, they can perform plays or skits, write them even. They can write their own reports, they can compose a song or perform a dance, create video or audio projects, they can do drawings, paintings, they can construct models. What I love about this, and that's just some of these ideas, is the student is working within the strengths of their interests and abilities. It's beautiful. But it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of pre-planning, and you have to have very, very clear rubrics for them. And many times you have to provide materials for them and assistance in helping them complete these. It's worth it though. Let me tell you, you want to excite kids about social studies? This will do it right here. Lastly, I want you to know that you do not have to create rubrics on your own. There's a number of rubric makers out there, and you can take a look at the link at the bottom. I happen to be, somewhat more aligned with RubyStar for teachers because I've used it a lot. The only problem with RubyStar is you don't get to save your rubric. It gets saved online and you can go back and grab it. But the nice thing with RubyStar is you can actually alter the definitions for each point value under the category for the rubric. And they give you pull down menus. It's really a beautiful, beautiful rubric maker. So this website will take you to about 5 free rubric makers, and you can look at those. Some of you are going to need to include rubrics in your summative assessment that you do within your unit plan. All right, I hope that provides you with a really nice overview of how to create these, gives you some ideas on how to create your test for the unit plan. And if you have any questions, please get a hold of me.